Ready? Hey guys, this is Trent Cotney, giving another episode of Law and Mortar, and today we're here with Roscoe Green. We're going to talk about some key provisions in construction contracts. Just got back from Portland, went out there and spoke with our Western States and local association out there. Had some great conversations, and a lot of the things that came up, Roscoe, you can probably attest to this, is contractors will get these contracts. They'll either get it upstream or they're looking at their own contracts, and they have questions and issues that they don't really know what some of the legalese is. And one of the things we try to do is just focus on the critical components. So obviously we could spend time, rewriting every single contract, but that's not going to do you, the customer, any good. So one of the things that we want to do is just focus on those handful of things that we know are absolutely critical. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about you. So Roscoe is a certified general contractor, and we're a big believer in, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk as well. So tell them a little bit about what you did as a general contractor.
Yeah, so my dad was a general contractor, so I worked for him for years growing up. Operated heavy equipment, did estimating superintendent, and went to undergrad, got my degree in construction engineering, and then after college went and worked for a construction management firm as an estimator, project manager, superintendent for large commercial projects. Mm-hmm. And so joined the Cotney team, and I'm happy to be a part of the team.
Yeah, I paid him to say that then. But we're lucky to have him. He worked up in Jacksonville, and very, very happy to have you here. It's been a great addition. So let's get right into the topic today. Delay claims. We get a lot of contractors that have delayed issues on jobs, and it can be everything from your owner or the customer delaying progress of the work to other subs or other contractors impacting your ability to get work done. So, Roscoe, why don't you talk a little bit about key provisions in contracts that deal with delays and how we kind of address that?
Okay. First, generally when we see a contract, most of the contracts have what is called a no damages for delay provision. So when you get your contract, you'll want to look at the contract to see whether or not there is such a provision in that contract. That provision is typically says something along the lines of, hey, Mr. Contractor, you are not entitled to damages for delays on this project, but you are entitled to an equitable adjustment to the contract time. With that being said, it is important for contractors to know that you might suffer damages outside of just delay. And so you need to understand what the definition of a delay is, and so you can understand how to properly document a delay on your project. A delay, I like to use real world examples. So let's say contractor A has a drywall and framing package contract. He shows up on the project. He's already framed in the walls. The successor activities might be plumbing rough-in, electrical rough-in. He shows up, none of that is done, and he's got to put the drywall up. He contacts the contractor. He says, hey, Mr. Contractor, I cannot put my drywall up because the plumbing and electrical rough-in is not complete. Well, contractor says, well, hold off. We'll put that up when they get done. That would be considered what is a delay because you could not perform any other work. Now, there's also damages that you've probably incurred or may not know exactly what those damages are, such as disruption and acceleration. Oftentimes, acceleration goes hand in hand with a delay. What will happen is the contractor will be behind schedule, which is why there's a delay, and he will essentially reorganize activities and accelerate the work to complete the project on time. There are two forms of acceleration. It can occur in two ways, I should say. One is, changing the duration of the activities, and two is changing or a substantial change, what the courts call a substantial change in the amount of work that's being performed at one time. And so it's important for you to know, what the difference is, so that you can document that early on in the process, in the project and in the process. There's also what is called disruption. And when we see these no damages for delay claims, there is often no language regarding a disruption or the acceleration. A disruption would be if that same contractor had that same drywall and framing package, and he estimated 100 man hours to do that project. He got on the project, and there were 6 other trades in that area where he was supposed to be performing work by himself. Well, then he lost productivity. That contractor lost productivity, and that is a recoverable claim. Now, delay claims aren't, and disruption and acceleration claims aren't very easy to bring. They really rely on your ability to document the happenings on the project. And so it'll be very important, when you examine your contract and you look at the language, that you decide, okay, what type of claims do I have an ability to bring, and then instruct, the field staff to send emails to the contractor when there's a delay, or to the owner when there's a delay, and to communicate amongst each other to make sure that you're papering the file, and so that you can, document that.
That's exactly, and you guys have heard me say it over and over again, the party with the best paper wins the day. And in construction, unfortunately, you always got to have your legal hat on. And what that means is you got to be out there emailing, communicating, and be a written letter, whatever it might be, to say, hey, I'm being delayed, I'm being delayed, I'm being delayed. The key thing that we recommend is when you sign a contract, make sure that your home office and your field personnel understand when the notice times are. Okay, if you've got to give notice within 10 days or 21 days or 2 days, make sure that you're bird dogging that, meaning that you are getting those emails out, you're getting those letters out so that you can preserve your claim. And Roscoe and I can work a lot of magic, but if you're missing some of that stuff, it makes it a little bit more difficult. So keep that in mind. So one of the other things I want to talk about, I guess, is pay when paid clauses. Now, every state is different, so that if you're in some of these states, the rules are very specific about contingent payment clauses. What I mean by that is you, the subcontractor, won't get paid to allow the contractor to get paid from the owner. Okay, there are very specific rules depending on what state you're in. But I know for Florida, for example, there's very specific rules and regulations, magic language that needs to be included. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
All right, yes. In Florida, the way the courts construe a paid when paid or paid if paid provision is if it's durational language, such as when, courts will not construe that as a pay per se if pay provision, and you will have, or the contractor will have, a reasonable amount of time to make payment. They see durational language as at some point that contractor will get paid by the owner, and that contractor should pay the subcontractor. Now, if it's conditional language, such as if, unless, then courts will construe that pay if paid provision as being valid and enforceable if it's clearly expressed that you are shifting the risk to that subcontractor. And so Trent and I recently had a matter where a subcontractor had not been paid by the contractor, brought an action against the contractor. The contractor moved to dismiss the complaint based on a pay when paid provision. Trent and I looked at the language, and we found that the language had the conditional aspect of it, but it was not clear as to the risk was being shifted to our client. And the court agreed, and we won the motion, and were successful in that argument. So it's very important that if you're going to have a pay if paid provision, that it is conditional language such as if, and that it's very clear that you are shifting the risk to the subcontractor. There's also instances where courts will construe the party's activity as a waiver of that provision, and so you'll want to be careful if you're do have a pay when paid or pay if paid provision, and you're essentially not following that provision and paying the subs even though you haven't been paid by the owner. That could be construed as a waiver of that provision. Other things you'll want to look for are conflicting language and your bond, your payment bond, or provisions in the agreement between the owner and the contractor, if you're a sub, that may cause that language to be conflicting and ambiguous and essentially unenforceable. So those are things you want to consider when you have a pay market pay provision.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things that we clue in on, regardless of what state you're doing work in. You might be, let's say you might be in a state like New York that has very specific rules about contingent payment. You might be doing work outside the state from a contractor, or a contractor may be giving you an out-of-state contract. So it's important to know that just because it says something, it doesn't necessarily mean it's enforceable. Going back to the delay issue, the contract may say you got to give notice, you got to do this, you got to do that, but there are ways around that. Based on communications in the field, what we're trying to say is just be aware, be alert as to what that is. Last thing I want to talk about briefly is indemnification. And indemnification is something that we get a lot of questions on. If you see a clause in your contract that says indemnification, that's something you need to pay attention to, because that could potentially affect your liability not only on that job, but after the job is done. So why don't you touch on that briefly?
Yeah, indemnity is basically you're agreeing to pay for a harm or a loss to the other party in layman's terms. And so when you look at your contract, you'll see in a provision that says something along the lines, a contractor agrees to indemnify the owner for any and all claims, actions arising out of or related to the project caused by contractor B or whatever. And so the key thing for you to know is what your obligation is, and two, to make sure that you have certain key language in your indemnity provision. A lot of times we'll see an indemnity provision that will not mention defend or hold harmless, and those are three distinct things. The indemnity obligation is your obligation to pay for the loss. However, that doesn't include, or oftentimes does not include, your obligation to defend a lawsuit that is brought against that party or the indemnity. And so you'll want to make sure that, if it's you, that you've got the defend aspect in there. And also, you want to make sure there's language that says that the indemnitor will hold you harmless. And what that means is they will pay for that defense cost and completely absolve all liability for those. And so, I think Trent can attest to this. The most likely scenario is you get on the project and contractor, has a contract with the owner. There's an issue on the project, and owner sues contractor, contractor sues sub, and all of these issues arise. The contractor brings a claim for indemnity, seeks to, have you or the subcontractor defend the lawsuit, and also wants you to pay for it. Well, if those certain provisions aren't spelled out in that indemnity provision in the contract, then it's going to be tough to get that party to do that, essentially.
Right. And look, we all know it flows downhill, and that's what indemnification provision is, basically. So when you get those, you want to look carefully to see exactly what you're indemnifying. A lot of times they love to use legalese like indemnity, indemnitor, and try to confuse you. But pay attention to it, because it's a really big provision. Like everything in construction, it's only a problem when it becomes a problem, and then it's a big problem.
Yes.
So, Roscoe, I want to thank you for speaking today. Here's a couple of things that we got coming up. Tomorrow we got a special Facebook Live. We have the president of the National Women in Roofing, Sherry Carlozzi, is going to be here, and Hillary Morgan, the general counsel from our office, is also going to do a short presentation on National Women in Roofing. And then next week, I think we're going to do one on why would you want to work here? The stuff that makes us special. So tune in for that. And if you guys have any questions that you'd like us to answer, any topics that you'd like to see us discuss, hit us up on Facebook. We're always checking it, and I appreciate you tuning in. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.